We are talking Megalodon. No, we are not talking the movie Meg that starred Jason Statham. Instead, we are talking Megalodon starring Michael Madsen. This is a 2018 Asylum production. Now, Asylum are a low-budget film company that produce what we call mockbusters, which are kind of low-budget movies that are designed to really feed off the spotlight caused by the blockbuster. So in this case, obviously, you had the Meg, and now we have this one, Megalodon. So obviously, these films are knocked out very cheaply. Asylum produces, it seems like, hundreds of movies a year, and most notably probably known for the Sharknado series these days. But this is actually one they actually take a relatively straight edge stance with. It's not really a silly comedy one, as much as you can get with the Asylum at least. It takes it somewhat, the material somewhat seriously. The story focuses on this American warship as it picks up a distress signal, I think, from this downed Russian submarine, or they find it on sonar or something. And this submarine it's been drilling into some communication pipes, etc. But they've unwittingly released this Megalodon from somewhere. Why it was there, we don't know. It's never actually explained. So this American warship rescues these Russian sailors and then has to fend off this huge Megalodon. So let's talk about what works with this movie. So obviously a low budget film, and it's quite easy to dismiss the Asylum films, but sometimes they do actually produce some okay material. Is this one? Well, let's discuss. So what works, first of all, I think the big noticeable thing with this movie is that the actual location shooting here, it appears to be actually filmed on a real warship, maybe a decommissioned one or something, but it certainly does give an air of authenticity to this, and almost like, wow, this actually looks like quite a realistic setting. Obviously it very much appears to be a real warship, so it does actually make it look at least like you are watching a professional military personnel here, which was quite good. Go hand in hand with that, I actually think there are, with the exception of a couple of people, the acting is mostly pretty good here, and you don't really get any poor line delivery or anything like that. They all seem taking themselves pretty seriously and deliver okay performances, albeit obviously they clearly haven't had many times to do lots of takes and reshoots and stuff like that, but it's okay, I think. Special effects wise, there are a few shots where the actual CGI Megalodon looks pretty good. It's more when it's not doing much. When it starts to move too much, then the effects fall apart a little bit. There are a couple of sequences where the Megalodon CGI looks pretty good. What doesn't work? Okay, so let's circle back to casting. Michael Madsen. So here he is in a relatively small role as this military Navy admiral, but when he's introduced, I mean, he is considering they've spent a lot of money, I think, obviously filming on this battleship. We've got Michael Madsen, who's meant to be this admiral. The first thing he does is slouches over these railings, not at all like the disciplined American military would be. He's got long hair, he's got loads of rings on, and he just looks like he's doing his thing and really doesn't have much direction here. The director, James Thomas, looks like he's maybe a little bit intimidated by Madsen and just has let him do his own thing, really, rather than giving him any type of direction. So he's not acting like an admiral, he's acting like Michael Madsen does in pretty much all of these these straight-to-DVD B movies. So that is the first thing where you think, no, this doesn't look quite right. And it's a shame, because when they have this setting, it almost ruins the illusion. And Michael Madsen seems to be ad-libbing. His lines seem to be somewhat from the hip, shall we say. Before I watched this film, I had a pretty good idea that it would do something that it actually did. And what that is that a lot of these were these low-budget TV movies, Asylum, sci-fi movies, things like that, where they have a creature effects-heavy movie. They'll fill up the plot with a human element, a human threat, so they really didn't have to spend the money on doing many special effects shops, and that's exactly what this film does. The bulk of this plot is actually concerned with these three Russian soldiers that get aboard this American warship and ultimately break free and end up being a human antagonist for our crew. And it's so typical, because you see this so many times, and I understand obviously the the budget restraints that these guys have. But there are ways to kind of maybe make the story a little bit interesting and make it actually focused on the thing that people are tuning in to see, which of course is the Megalodon. So it's one of those typical things here, and you just get some really kind of trite, cheesy lines. You know, the acting is okay for the most part, but there are a couple of characters here, led by Michael Madsen, who's so miscast in the role here, that makes it a little bit, you know, a little bit cheesy. Also, on the subject of cheesy, I've got to say, enough with the flag waving in this movie. I mean, they've obviously got permission to film on this warship, and in return, I think that they've really kind of said, well, okay, well, we'll make a big, you know, we'll kind of big up the Navy here and say all these kind of like inspirational things and how great, you know, a brotherhood and all of this is. And there's like 2 or 3 different periods in this movie where people will give these kind of impassioned, you know, monologues or speeches or something about how, you know, how everyone is kind of a brotherhood and they're all going to stick together and something like that. It's like, man, this is like super going into super kind of cheesy territory here. And then we get into our special effects, and like I've said, the Megalodon isn't actually on screen really all that much at all, to be fair. I mean, it's probably got 2 minutes of screen time, and out of that 2 minutes of screen time, when it actually does anything and it's moving around, it's silly. It looks cheap. And I've got to say, the final resolution, should we say, with the Megalog borders on ridiculous, and then it almost goes into kind of Sharknado territory. So the story is very predictable. It's like, I mean, I knew it was going to be like this even before I kind of watched the frame of this movie. But, you know, I like a shark movie, but I've got to say this one I found a little bit dull. I think the performances weren't too bad though, and I've got to say I thought the aesthetics of this kind of this setting. James Thomas definitely is a fan of Michael Bay, the way he's kind of like aping a kind of a low budget Michael Bay style, but having the kind of like the cameras kind of like swirl around our protagonists as they're kind of looking around all heroic and stuff like that. So it kind of looks like a low budget Michael Bay film. But ultimately, unfortunately, the story is too focused on these kind of like these Russian guys, and it ends up being, you know, more or less a kind of you know, a military espionage low budget thriller than a kind of with a few scenes of a Megalodon tacked on, and the kind of the resolutions and kind of how people are dealing with that actual situation in the Megalodon when we are dealing with it, unfortunately seems more like an afterthought. So I've got to say it's a little bit of a below average movie for me, but there are elements here that I feel do make it somewhat worth watching in regards to some of the kind of the military stuff on display here, which I thought was okay, and some okay acting from some of the majority of the cast. So I'll give it a 4 out of 10. It's definitely not one of these classic shark movies that you need to see though. And the original Megalodon movie, which came out some years ago, which is a straight to DVD one, I would say it's actually better than this one, to be quite honest. That had a bit more story in it, if that makes sense. So there you go, 4 out of 10. Have you seen this one? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.